7 straight months. That's how long Canadians have been quietly turning their backs on US malls, gas pumps, and diners. And make no mistake, this isn't some random seasonal dip. This is a full-blown exodus of shoppers who used to pour billions into American border towns. In July alone, Canadian trips back from the US by car collapsed nearly 37% compared to last year. Air travel wasn't spared either, plunging by 26%. That's not a slowdown, that's a crash. And the money that used to flow south? It's evaporating. In the last quarter of 2024, Canadian spending in the US fell to 5.6 billion Canadian dollars, down 7% year over year. By 2025, the decline has accelerated. To put that into perspective, Canadians are the #1 foreign customers for American businesses. In 2024, they spent over 20 billion US dollars in the States, and economists say just a 10% drop in that spending equals a loss of $2.1 billion for American hotels, gas stations, and retailers. Now imagine double or triple that decline, because that's what the data is showing us this year. This isn't just about fewer cross-border shopping trips. It's about a political earthquake shaking the very foundation of US-Canada trade and tourism. And it's driving Donald Trump absolutely crazy, because while he's been busy slapping tariffs on Canada, Canadians have responded in the most powerful way possible, by closing their wallets and keeping their billions at home. So tonight, we dive deep into the numbers, the politics, and the fallout. This is the story of how Canada just delivered $1 billion shockwave to America's economy, and why border towns from Vermont to Washington state are bracing for disaster. To understand why Canadians are suddenly abandoning US stores, you have to follow the trail of policy and pocketbooks. And it starts at the top, with Donald Trump's tariffs. On August 1st, 2025, the White House escalated its trade war by raising tariffs on Canadian goods not covered by the USMCA to a staggering 35%, up from 25%. The message was clear. Washington was willing to squeeze Canada, betting that Ottawa would cave. But what Trump didn't calculate was the blowback. Because while Canada may be America's quiet neighbor, its consumers are anything but powerless. The Canadian public reacted the only way they could. They stopped spending in the United States. And here's why that stings. Canada is not just some minor tourist market. In fact, Canadians make up the single largest group of foreign visitors to the US, generating over $20 billion annually and supporting nearly 140,000 American jobs. When they turn away, small-town economies feel it like a gut punch. But tariffs aren't the only culprit. The Canadian dollar has been trading at just 72 US cents, one of its weakest levels in years. That means every tank of gas, every Target run, and every night in a Buffalo or Bellingham motel suddenly feels 30% more expensive. Combine a weak loonie with punitive tariffs, and you've created a perfect storm where cross-border shopping no longer makes sense. And the sentiment is measurable. A Longwoods International Travel Survey this summer found that 63% of Canadian travelers are now less likely to visit the US specifically because of American politics and policy. Nearly 80% cited tariffs and economic policies as a reason they're staying away. So let's piece this together. Trump slaps tariffs to look tough. The loonie sinks, punishing Canadians already struggling with inflation at home. And ordinary people, families who once drove across the border for cheaper groceries, gas, or a weekend getaway, are now saying, enough. We're not spending another dime in Trump's America. And the consequences? They aren't theoretical. We're already seeing ghostly empty parking lots in Vermont. We're already hearing from business owners in Point Roberts, Washington, a US town almost entirely dependent on Canadian shoppers, that they can't survive without cross-border traffic. We're already watching Whatcom County, long fueled by Canadian retail dollars, report steep drops in sales tax revenue. This is not just a dip in tourism. This is economic retaliation. One receipt, one missed shopping cart, one empty hotel room at a time. All right, let's get into the raw numbers because this isn't just about perception, it's about hard cash bleeding out of the US economy. In July 2025, Statistics Canada reported a 36.9% collapse in Canadian car trips to the United States compared to last year. Air travel, down 25.8%. That marked the 7th consecutive monthly decline. Think about that. Not 1 month of relief, not a pause, 7 straight months of Canadians voting with their feet. And when you track the dollars, the picture gets even uglier. In the final quarter of 2024, Canadians spent 5.6 billion Canadian dollars on US trips, already 7% less than the year before. By early 2025, official tourism indicators bluntly said it. Canadians were pulling back from US travel. And the latest monthly data backs that up. Canada's imports of travel services fell to 4.5 billion Canadian dollars in June 2025. Proof that fewer hotel rooms, restaurants, and stores on the American side are seeing Canadian cash. Now, here's where the math slams home. According to US Travel, Canadian visitors in 2024 generated $20.5 billion in spending. They also supported 140,000 American jobs. And their economists are crystal clear. Even a 10% drop in Canadian visits costs the US $2.1 billion and roughly 14,000 jobs. But remember, these declines aren't 10%. They're 30, 35, even 40%, depending on the category. If you scale that up, we're talking about billions upon billions evaporating year to date. Border hotels, outlet malls, gas stations, and mom and pop diners, they are the first casualties. Let's put a human face on it. In Point Roberts, Washington, the town survives almost entirely on Canadian shoppers. Business owners there are now watching revenue crater. In Whatcom County, Washington, past studies found as much as 12% of sales tax revenue came from Canadians. This year, local officials are bracing for a budget hole. And over in Vermont, small shops along the border say Canadian foot traffic has simply vanished. This is what happens when you weaponize tariffs without thinking about consequences. Trump may have wanted to punish Ottawa, but instead, he's choking the life out of American border economies. And those numbers, they don't lie. So who's paying the price for this cross-border retreat and who's cashing in? Let's break it down. First, the losers. At the top of the list, US border towns. Places like Buffalo, Detroit, Bellingham, and Plattsburgh, entire retail economies that depend on Canadians crossing the line for weekend shopping binges. For decades, Canadians fueled outlet malls, Costco runs, and cheap gas fill-ups. Now those parking lots are empty. Hotels and restaurants near the border are also bleeding. Every canceled overnight trip means fewer heads in beds, fewer tips for waitstaff, fewer shifts for cleaners. The U.S. Travel Association warns that a steep drop in Canadian visitors translates directly into job losses, not in Washington, D.C., but in the small towns Trump promised to protect. And then there's the broader retail sector. When Canadians stop swiping their credit cards in the U.S., that's billions in lost revenue for American chains. Target, Macy's, outlet brands, many of them saw Canadian shoppers as reliable repeat customers. This year, they're watching those dollars evaporate. But while border economies lose, Canada itself has unexpected winners. Retailers on the Canadian side of the line, from Toronto to Vancouver, are seeing a surge in local spending. That's money that might have gone to US stores now being redirected to Canadian businesses. Canadian malls are busier, gas stations are holding on to customers, and Ottawa's tax coffers are benefiting. There's also a psychological win for Canada. By pulling back, Canadians are sending a clear message. If Washington treats them like a punching bag, they'll hit back the only way ordinary citizens can, by shifting their wallets. And ironically, the biggest loser of all might just be Donald Trump himself. His tariffs were designed to show strength. Instead, They've backfired into billions in lost revenue for the very US communities he claims to champion. The man who promised to make America great again is watching small-town America get weaker thanks to his own policy choices. So yes, Canada's shoppers might not wear suits or wave flags in diplomatic summits, but their quiet boycott is proving far more effective than any press release. So, where does this all lead? If the trend continues, and every indicator says it will, the US could be staring at a multi-billion-dollar black hole in 2025 alone. Remember, even a modest 10% drop in Canadian spending means a loss of over $2 billion. But with declines running at 30 to 40%, the reality is much worse. That's not just lost money, that's lost jobs, shuttered stores, and hollowed out border towns. And unless Trump rolls back tariffs or the Canadian dollar magically strengthens, this isn't turning around anytime soon. Instead, Canadians are already rerouting their travel dollars towards Europe, Mexico, and their own domestic markets. Ottawa, for its part, is seizing the moment, doubling down on trade with Europe and Asia, making sure Canadian consumers have options that don't include the United States. The political irony? Trump's tariffs, meant to project toughness, are accelerating America's isolation. He isn't just pushing away foreign governments, he's pushing away ordinary foreign shoppers. And as those empty parking lots show us, shoppers don't negotiate. They just stop showing up. So here's the bottom line. Canada has quietly pulled billions from US tills. It's a silent but devastating retaliation. And it's not playing out in Washington boardrooms. It's playing out in the diners, gas stations, and strip malls of small-town America. If you think this story matters, if you believe people deserve to know the real cost of reckless tariffs and political games, then don't keep it to yourself. Hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe so we can keep cutting through the noise with facts that actually matter. Because while Trump may try to spin this as strength, the receipts don't lie. And those receipts say America is losing, one Canadian shopper at a time.